Before we begin, in the spirit of reconciliation and respect, the InkGuild acknowledges that we live, work, and play on the traditional Treaty 7 territory of the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Siksika, the Kainai, and the Piikani nations, as well as the Stoney Nakoda and the Tsuut'ina nations.
This territory is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3, within the historical Northwest Métis homeland. Finally, we acknowledge all Indigenous and non-Indigenous to honor and celebrate this territory alongside us.
Coughing through the episode. I'm mostly over my cold, but now I'm in the coofing stage.
You're in the coofing
Please
stage.
never say that word again.
Coofing?
Mm-hmm.
It's way too close to another slang word that's come about recently, and I do not like you saying it personally.
What?
No.
Well, they're not going to say it.
I don't want him to know. I don't want you to know as well, actually.
I don't actually know what you're referencing. I just know I don't
know
like
either.
that.
Are you talking about coom?
Fuck.
Oh. I'm close.
Oh, no.
I apologize, everyone, if I'm cooming too much.
We've definitely said coom.
Yeah,
Fair
I just
bit.
didn't want to remind the 12-year-olds in the chat about it.
What 12-year-olds? We're very mature people.
Yeah, Gabe's a boomer.
Yeah. No. I'm not a boomer. I'm a regular adult.
Okay, boomer.
Shut up.
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Hey there.
Bonjour.
My name is Dean, and welcome back to the InkGuild Podcast. Just go to fucking therapy.
Don't correct me. I don't care.
Need to start a revolution.
I'm going to fucking explode if I don't say this by now.
She would challenge them to a double dutch.
I'm going to summon up his spirit to fix all of this up for
You
me.
didn't have good enough tea and or comic books, so
And you know what? I'm gonna say it.
All of them are fucking idiots.
Simply everyone is taking cocaine.
Just say your morning routine.
You're replicant rebate.
I'm so excited to find out if Jughead got abducted by aliens or not.
Boneless.
Is your refrigerator running? Better go get it then.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the InkGuild Podcast. I'm Dean, joined tonight by my co-host Alex,
Hello.
and we are also joined by Gabe,
Hello.
Brooke,
Hi.
and Tyler.
Bonjour.
Tonight, for this episode, or for our penultimate episode of the season, we are going to talk about how to end a story. Yes, I know that it's kind of ironic, considering ending a story, or how to end a story, is not the end of the podcast, or is not the end of the season, but you'll see what our season finale is soon.
Her cantaloupe's reaching for him like hands.
Parting her delicate flower petals. And sorry.
I was cringing so hard that I didn't laugh.
That being said, tonight for how to end a story, we're going to talk about the endings to thing. We're going to be talking about story endings as a follow-up conversation from our I believe season 4 opening, how starting a new story. And I'll give thing. I want to acknowledge the proper credit. Alex recommended this episode, and I fully agreed with it because it seems like a really fun thing to do. So, I think
You're welcome.
thank you. So, as a bit of a preamble, like how do we feel on endings, on story endings?
They're really hard to do.
Well, as long as the author's not trying for a cash grab, I'm usually okay with it. Personally. Also, did you say the podcast was ending, Dean? I was listening to your intro there, and I was really sad for a moment.
I meant the season.
Okay.
I just meant the season. I'm sorry. The InkGuild Podcast will continue on as long as it will continue on for a long time.
We'll get some new members in. We'll all die and pass away. We'll pass off the mantle. We'll do a full Marvel with this thing.
Mm-hmm. The InkGuild legacy. It never ends.
Never ends.
Yeah.
I love it when a story actually ends. I hate it when things are left unresolved because the author couldn't be fucking bothered.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
Gabe, Brooke, how do you guys feel about endings?
Necessary.
Endings are really important to have in a story
Yeah.
because how will you know when to stop reading?
It sounds kind of stupid, but like it's also a bar that some things don't even get. Like they dig under the bar somehow.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I
There
think
can be like lots of different kinds of endings. There's no one kind of good ending.
mm-hmm.
Mhm.
That is true. I think a story's ending is very dependent on, the story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
An ending needs to tie into how the rest of the story has been. I've read a lot of stories that sort of just have a happy ending, and it's like happy endings are they're cool and all, but like if the story hasn't built up to that in a way that's good, it's like, hey, I would prefer, I don't know, maybe something more fucked up. This rest of the story was pretty fucked up, or like it was building something fucked up. This kind of feels like a cop out almost.
I agree with that. Like we talked on the sex, love, and romance episodes about the type of sex scene sort of has to reference the genre. I feel endings are kind of similar,
I would
right?
agree with that, yeah.
mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Like I don't expect Berserk to have a happy ending where everyone goes and lives on a farm and nothing ever bad happens again.
Yeah.
I don't know if I expect Berserk to have an ending, unfortunately.
I don't think so either.
There's that too, yeah.
Yeah. So then, what I was gonna say kind of ties into what everyone's already said. It just has to, I think, make sense for where your story will eventually, end, but just where the story has gone so far. And I think properly executing an ending that feels satisfactory for the story is a lot more difficult than it's a lot more difficult than certainly I thought of, but I think maybe that's a good starting, or maybe that's a good another area of conversation that we can go on. Like, why is it that some stories, or why is it that writing an ending can be difficult?
So, if I may jump in here with a bit of historical definitioning, what's the issue with a story is a term I like to call, or at least ending a story, is a term called catharsis. And I know probably almost everyone has heard of the term catharsis. It comes from Greek, catharsis, ha ha ha. We're such a great language, everybody. Which means, in its most basic term, the process of releasing or providing relief from strong or repressed emotions. It comes from an old Greek storyteller by a very similar name, who I'm not sure if he coined the term, but the term was coined about him, and goes about the idea that the ending should provide an emotional release for the tension built up therein. And a lot of endings have trouble with this, I think, because they don't know how much tension they've built or how little, depending. And that's where endings can have trouble. If you have a huge emotional release where everyone is crying and hugging, but the tension that came at the climax of Act 3 wasn't that tense, then you've missed the mark, right?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a big problem with a lot of shows and media recently, is everyone must have either a huge, super duper tense moment, but no one gets the catharsis that's needed for it. No one gets the release, or the inverse, where you have a climax that's not actually that epic, but a catharsis that makes everyone think, wow, everyone just died. Why are they all feeling this way? Know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Just, I think I think there's certainly a definitive structure with acts, not just in how the information presented during it, but in also how each act ends. So Act 1 is supposed to set up Act 2, Act 2 is supposed to set up Act 3. And to be more specific with that, Act 1 is supposed to end like setting up. It's supposed to end the setting up portion of like of your story, of your world, of your characters, and kind of build more on that throughout Act 2 and Act 3. Act 2 is where you start like expand, like it's where you start going more into character depth. It's where you start looking more into motivations, backstories, and progressing the plot all while you do that. And and eventually as you kind of move into Act 3, how Act 2 ends then is with either a very big revelation or a big moment that gets people interested in Act 3, and Act 3 is the culmination of everything of the story so far. And I think it's because of that structure that can, like, because of that kind of linear structure, I want to say, it's almost become like you kind of know when one, like with that structure, you already know when one part is beginning next, when one part is over and then the next part begins. And that is so important, I think, especially for people who maybe prefer more linear stories, or who aren't familiar with non-linear stories yet. Like, and I think if we're talking about, what is so hard about writing endings, I want to look at the Eternals for a second. And I know, Gabe, you'd wanted to talk about Eternals at some point. It is, I had no fucking idea when any of the acts were ending at some point in the Eternals. Like, there was just so much going on at once. It was just kind of hard to know like when this act was ending and moving into the next one.
I've heard the same criticism said about the second Fantastic Beasts movie. And that like it has no second act. So you just have like a lot of setup, and then the third act happens with like no like build up to it.
You know what movie like has that problem in like in an almost like kind of jarring amount is the first Suicide Squad movie. That whole movie is so weird to watch. It feels like you're watching like just one continuous nonstop scene. It's very bizarre. Yeah, the way that whole movie is structured, like act wise, is very it's bad. I don't have anything more deep to say about it. It's pretty bad. Like, I feel like, and shit, I don't know. I feel like if someone wants to make a movie that doesn't have a 3-act structure, but they can come about it in like in a way that's like competent, like sure, shit, by all means, break structures, do shit that's fucking weird. I don't think it's necessary to use a structure every single time, but I think if you're going to do something that's unconventional, it has to be number one, intentional, and I don't get that impression from Suicide Squad. It genuinely just feels like it's a end result of that movie's awful production, and terrible behind the scenes editing, shit that happened there, and also just it has to be like purposeful, I think, because I've seen some movies that break the 3-act structure, but they do it for like a purpose to tell the story in a unique way that like it had to be that way. And I don't get that impression of Suicide Squad. It was just poorly made.
See, yeah. I'm glad you brought up intention and purpose, and to drag this away from the 3-act structure, because I realize I'm the one that said the acts terminology. Because it's hard to talk about endings without the acts, because an end requires all the setup beforehand. That's the whole point of catharsis, right? But to bring purposeful and intention back to endings, the idea that you have to want to end. And again, that's a problem I found in a lot of media. It doesn't want to end. They want to keep making money off it. The author wants to keep writing and cashing the checks, right? So endings almost don't seem to be planned. They seem to be an afterthought. It's like we have to have this many romances, this many action scenes. We have to set up this many sequels. What are we going to do to end? And I don't think an ending should be that hard, and it shouldn't be that much of an afterthought. You should almost start at the end, in my opinion. You should have a goal in mind with a lot of at least storytelling media.
Mhm.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and that's something I was planning to bring up later in our discussion. I also think, like, for new writers especially, at least this is something that I know I have a lot of experience with, is when I've come up with my stories and my characters, I find endings really hard because I don't want to, like, let go of them. You know, like, you become so attached to the characters in the world and, like, the stories you could tell with them that sometimes it's hard to be like, but this is where it has to end. And so I do think that's, like, similar to what you were talking about, Tyler, but of course there's also the difference between, like, you know, liking what you're telling and simply making stuff for the money. But I do think it's, like, a similar issue in that, like, knowing where to end and when to end a story is arguably a skill that a writer needs to have, because
Yeah.
everything has to come to an end. Things cannot keep going forever, and it's about finding the right spot for a story to hit that ending.
Love the line, everything has to come to an end. We're getting real spiritual here. This too shall pass. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, like that's probably been like one of my biggest issues with like the post Avengers Endgame MCU, and it's like not to say that era of the franchise hasn't produced stuff that I don't like. 'Cause it totally has produced stuff that I mean, it has produced stuff that I like. I mean, but like that's kind of been one of my biggest issues with it, because like I Endgame felt like it, like if they wanted to just end it there, that would have been satisfying. It would have been, and now I get the impression that like it's just not going to have an ending. I don't feel about
They're
that.
gonna
It's
keep
weird.
pumping out the films until they stop making money, which will be never, because people will always go watch them.
They're gonna keep making these movies until every single original cast member is dead and buried, and that's fucking weird to think about.
Yeah.
And I mean, like, that's kind of why, you know, it's kind of hard already for superhero movies, especially like, you know, modern franchises especially, to end, because it makes money. Like, it makes so much fucking money for like everyone involved, like the actors, the producers, the like the crew especially. Like, so long as there are people who are eager to continue seeing like the story, like to see these characters, then the story will never end. And it's funny that you bring, like, it's interesting, Gabe, that you brought up Suicide Squad, because the clearest difference between Suicide Squad and James Gunn's Suicide Squad is the ending. It felt like a very like James Gunn's Suicide Squad, for those who haven't seen it, its ending is very conclusive, and it feels very satisfying knowing where like these characters end, and knowing that the story could be like, the story is basically over at that point. You don't have to explore these characters again. But because in contrast with David Ayer's Suicide Squad, it's so clearly part of a franchise where like the story will go on eventually. And that's a recurring problem for, like, that's been a recurring problem, obviously, like even before like Endgame in the MCU, because every single movie just felt like an ending wasn't an ending. It was just like, an ending wasn't an ending because you had the post-credit scene. You were going to see this character again. And sure, it may have been building towards a bigger overall narrative, or it may have been building towards a bigger overall narrative that serves, you know, Infinity War and Endgame. But at the same time, when the story continues after an ending that feels extremely satisfying, whether or not, you know, people can say what they want about, which is the better movie, but basically just Endgame was supposed to be the end of it. It feels like the complete end of it. And it, like the fact that Marvel now is still continuing to try and continue the MCU is interesting because people are burned out by it. Like, I think we had either talked about this on podcast before or have mentioned maybe just off conversation, but like I personally am burned out, and I don't know if I can I don't know just how much more investment I can give to Marvel in the long term, because like the MCU's biggest thing up until Endgame was the fact that it was all one continuous story. And now that the story was basically over, like, what else can you do? And I think maybe that sets up that sets us up for maybe the next conversation. But Brooke, I wanted to ask you, like, why is it that you think that writing endings can be difficult?
Well, people can be really picky about endings, and it can be a big reason why studios just seem to go on fucking forever with stuff, or like just do things really wrong because they're trying to appease fans and then it like backfires. My philosophy is always just like, you should always be creating a story to finish it. Like your goal should always be completion. Like, you can have fun along the way, but it should always complete.
I'm having to hold my tongue so hard. Continue.
Oh yeah, I'm doing this very intentionally.
It's a bait. Got it.
But yeah, it's always been like one of the things that I think of pretty early on in like writing process is just trying to be like, what will be a good, satisfying ending, tie up all the loose ends. And when it comes to critiquing, a lot of the critiquing that I do of other media will be what happened in the conclusion, how they concluded it, and if it made sense for the world, the characters, and all that kind of jazz.
No, definitely. Jizz is definitely a finish. So good work. Before we move on, I did have one other point on why endings would be so hard, if you don't mind.
Of course, go ahead.
Bye-bye.
Expectation is a huge thing, and especially with larger, more prominent series. I'll go into it a bit more in my bit of case study, but Patrick Rothfuss, one of my favorite authors who's writing the King Killer trilogy, still hasn't released the third book. He's released 2 amazing books with huge worlds, lots of questions and interesting characters, and the third book seems to be nowhere in sight. Watch, I say this on podcast, and the moment it's released, he literally releases the book the next day. I would actually just be happy at that point. But expectation is a huge killer for motivation for an author especially. Look at what happened with George R.R. Martin. Again, probably we'll talk about more in case study. Winds of Winter's never going to come out. There is too much hype. He's going to pass away eventually, and then we're going to have a Tolkien on our hands where someone goes through all his notes and gives us the Winds of Winter that way. Just because who could actually live up to that hype, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And like with Patrick Rothfuss specifically, I've done a little of my own research here and there. And because he is such a good author, in my opinion, and one of my favorites, I just want him to release the ending. I don't care if he ties up every plot loop at this point. I don't care if every character has catharsis. At this point, I want him to write the book he wanted to write when he started and not give a shit what the fans think, personally. Because I care more about the artist necessarily than the art in this case.
I think that's also a big thing is artists, like writers, should write the stories they want to write and not write either to like meet expectations or to thwart expectations, because that's been a really big thing recently. Is a lot of writers will, especially in like movies and TV shows, there'll be all this build up for something that's going to happen, and then a fan will correctly predict what's going to happen, and the writers will change it because they want it to be shocking and twisting. And I think that's like a huge issue with like you said, an ending should be planned. You should know where a story is going to end, like basically before you start writing it, because that's how you build up to it correctly. And if you're building up to a specific ending and then you change it at the last minute just so that no one will see it coming, that's not good writing. That's not how you write a good ending.
It's really not. I'm glad you talked about like the idea of people predicting the ending, because that's honestly a sign of a good story sometimes, is the idea that you have woven together this plot so well that there is only one option for how it could end. And if your writers feel like they've got that, then it's actually just going to lead to more catharsis than having you just pull the rug out under them because you have some sadistic pride or ego to fill about plot twists. I'm looking right at you, Game of Thrones showrunners.
You know, it's interesting that we brought up George R. R. Martin, because George R. R. Martin he's spoken about this publicly. He said something about how, like, if you're writing a mystery story, and then like if you're writing like a standard whodunit where there's a victim and there's a killer and there's a set of suspects, and you're writing a mystery story, then the standard way you write a mystery story is you sprinkle clues throughout the story so that like the detective will figure it out, and maybe the readers can figure it out too. Have a little fun along the way. But if you're writing a story like this, and you're like you're writing it, and then someone figures out the twist before, or not the twist, the reveal of the killer before it is revealed, before the detective goes, aha, and you realize that like, and then you change it so that it was it wasn't the butler, it was this guy. Then what you've done is you've negated all of that like good clue sprinkling that you've done to make a surprise, and the surprise might be like you might have an instant. Trope Talks talked about this in their video on like on plot twists, where it's like you'll have a surprise. You'll get like an instant like but then like every time you go back to look at the story, it's like oh well, there's all this shit happening and it led to nothing.
Isn't there like a saying about this? Like a good plot twist should be like surprising but inevitable. Like you should be able to like go back and find the like this is so satisfying as a reader once you've like read a book, to go back and reread a book and pick up on all the like little hints throughout it that lead to the conclusion. And if you've gone in like TV shows, movies too, whatever, any story that you consume, you can do this in. And like I think it's a mark of a good story if you can go back and enjoy something a second time, knowing what the twist is.
Like
it has to build up. It has to make sense.
Yeah.
I feel like with Game of Thrones that it's interesting because I feel like Game of Thrones sort of, with the whole Red Wedding thing, like that was like the catalyst to like other Game of Thrones showrunners being like, oh well, everyone liked the Red Wedding, so we gotta have more surprises and more plot twists. But the whole reason that the Red Wedding was a good twist was because it did exactly that. It said the whole of stuff. I only saw it in TV shows. I'm referring to as season 3. I know this is book 3, but I'm a pleb. But yeah, the whole of season 3 is like,
you can't be a plebeian.
I'm not a Roman. Anyway, the whole of season 3 is setting up this whole that Robb Stark is just fucking up, and he's just making mistake after mistake, and then you get to the Red Wedding and it's shocking, but then you go back and you're like, oh, this was totally coming. He was setting himself up to fucking fail, and then he did, and it's weirdly satisfying to watch it happen.
Yeah, it's such a peeve when writers try to like outsmart or like try to think that, you know, their current ending, even if it's leaked or if it's given away, that they try to change it. Like, fucking don't do that. Like, first of all, commit, coward. Like,
oh, you're saying that? You're saying that, Dean?
I know. Just look. So what I'm trying to say is just like, there's nothing wrong, I think, with when your audience knows what's going to happen. Like, in certain contexts, like if you want to do it well, then your audience may have some idea, but pulling the rug from under an audience nowadays, when everyone has access to how many different kinds of like in kind of information to know about this whole story from the very first minute to the very last minute of it, like that doesn't ever mean that it's a bad thing.
Yeah.
Like, if your story is,
can we like, I feel we talked about Romeo and Juliet in like another episode recently, I feel like, but can we like bring that up again? Because I feel like there's also this thing where we need to remember that, first of all, there's nothing wrong with having a twist in a story if you're doing it well, but a story also doesn't need to have a twist. And like if we look at Romeo and Juliet, which is one of like the most well-known stories in the world at this point, like it literally tells you how it's going to end at the very beginning, but people still wait around and watch till the end to see how it happens, you know? Like,
yeah,
just because you know how a story ends doesn't mean you can't still enjoy it.
mm-hmm. I agree.
And that's playing with expectation and foreshadowing, right?
Yeah.
The idea that it sets up that expectation right at the beginning. The expectation for Game of Thrones was eventually who's going to be king, right?
Mhm.
Who's going to end this great world-spanning war, or at least Westeros-spanning war. Esteros didn't do much. And so when people are looking for that expectation, they start to formulate it themselves. They start to dig deeper. They start to look. And it's the same with Romeo and Juliet. You know it's going to end in tragedy. And you keep looking at, oh, how is it going to end in tragedy? Is it going to be about Tybalt? Is it going to be about the maid? Is it going to be about the secret wedding? Is their families going to find out? All these things. And then it leads to a satisfying, cathartic conclusion. Because, again, the author doesn't try to pull the rug out. Suddenly, Romeo doesn't wake up, go running away, and be like, ha ha ha, this was all a tax fraud. Know what I mean?
Tax fraud.
Oh my god.
Yeah. Yeah, it's I think to agree with you there, like it's so interesting now when like you kind of reveal what happens in the beginning, because that's essentially thing. I know I'm gonna think, I know this is a lot more complicated than just saying this, but that's essentially a whodunit. Like a crime has happened. There hasn't been a lot of build up since it happened, and the entire episode is piecing together everything until eventually you get to like you find the killer, and the intrigue between who could it be, picking apart like context clues and analyzing characters is a really fun experience. Especially like if you were to even imply that something is going wrong throughout the episode and start at the very beginning, or even if you were to just like outright say some like a pivotal plot point in the beginning and then just build yourself to there. Like there are like when it comes to the ending, it's less so I think about some kind of shocking twist, because people have tried doing that before, and track history has really made that been a hit or miss, for lack of a better words.
How, like, we all know there's that meme, right? That's like freeze frame. Yep, that's me. How did I get into this? Like, that's such a good, like, you're revealing what's going to happen later in the story, but it's just a way of like, you know, teasing and being like, oh, watch to find out how it gets here, you know? But that trope, I guess, is like popular for a reason.
Yes, and it's something that I don't know if to bring this up now or later in case study, but my favorite ending and my favorite way to utilize an ending is actually through appropriate use of a good framing device. And the fourth wall break, freeze frame, wonder how I got here, is a framing device in essence, right?
Yeah.
It both begins the story. You'll probably get a little bit throughout as you're breaking the fourth wall here and there, and probably near the ending, where it's like, now you know how I got here. Let's see how it ends. I love a solid framing device, especially to foreshadow and then especially to wrap up the ending.
I mean, I've talked about Baccano any number of times on this podcast. I think I would think I talked about the same thing very recently. I can't remember on which episode specifically, but Baccano has a very interesting framing device where the whole first and last episode of Baccano are a journalist and his daughter trying to piece together the scattered reports of what happens in the story, in the actual story of Baccano. And in the very first episode, it reveals the endings to a bunch of characters' individual arcs, but it reveals them totally out of context. And so, like, you basically get the fuck spoiled out of you, but then, like, when you go through the rest of the story, you're like, okay, I've been spoiled, but I haven't been spoiled in any way that's ruined the story. If anything, I'm super intrigued now because I want to see where this shit goes. I want to see why there's a guy on the side of train tracks missing an arm. I want to see why there's a red dude who's reading a scribbled letter. I want to see who this fucking immortal mafia guy is. I want to know what the fuck's going on here. I want to know why these journalists are talking about it. It's a very clever framing device, and it just fucking hooks you right away.
And see, you can only foreshadow if you've got your ending planned. You can't foreshadow something that you don't know is coming.
Yeah, and I mean, like, that is partially what editing is for as well, but, like, yeah, you need to be able to know where you're going in order to get there.
Sorry, editing, what's that?
I also want to mention offhandedly one of my favorite examples of, like, a foreshadow with a reveal, which is in Maggie Stiefvater, I never know how to pronounce her name, in the Raven cycle. In the first, I mean, spoilers for this if you haven't read it, by the way. But in, like, the first book, you meet one of these characters for the first time, and he goes, "I'm dead." Everyone laughs it off. And then by the end of the book, you find out that he is, in fact, dead, and he is a ghost.
Lol.
It's so well done because it's like you have this thing where he just drops it casually and everyone's just like, oh, that's ridiculous, how could we be talking to you? Or like he has this like edgy teen boy vibe where you're just like, oh, he's just being edgy, whatever, calling himself a vampire, that kind of thing. And then you like get there and you're like, oh, he was being serious. And like that's another, like that one's a lot harder to do, I think, but like if you can pull that off, it's so satisfying to like get to that point where you realize that you've literally been told something and just dismissed it.
Mm-hmm. So I think so we'd been talking a little bit about like, that was a really good discussion actually. I think when it comes to then about endings, like it you know, to kind of summarize it, you know, should feel conclusive, and kind of let everyone
satisfying.
Like, yeah, it should feel satisfying, yeah. And
Tarsus.
Yeah. So I think then just let's talk about when a story doesn't end. And what I mean by that is sequels. So let's talk about let's talk about how stories end and eventually set up something else, which, you know, we talked a little bit about like already. I had mentioned it when I was talking about the MCU, but yeah, let's open on endings setting up sequels, and I'll start actually with Brooke.
Why?
I mean, I want to hear your thoughts. Like everyone here will speak, but start off with you. I chose at random, dude. I don't know what else you want me to say.
Okay. All right. Yeah. They're just, you know, they're often very bad. They're milking the cow. You can tell a lot of the time that it's not like a passion project. It's just this got a lot of money in for us. We can get more money. I mean, it's not like I hate sequels though, because there's a reason that people like the thing, and why they will go to consume this new thing is because they like that thing. And it just needs to be done well. Like if you finish off something so conclusively that it's like, this is perfect. You really shouldn't touch it again. And the big problem with people going back and touching completely conclused completely conclusive stories is that they'll often retcon a lot of stuff, and that pisses people off. But they'll be like, no, this is for a reason, this all makes sense, but it just makes people angry.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, has anyone... I haven't seen it, but I have heard discourse about it. Has anyone seen the new Matrix movie?
Oh, no.
I have
seen it.
Yeah. I don't want to.
So, from what I've heard, some people really like it. Some people really don't like it. And, like, as someone who had like recently finished watching all of the Matrix movies, like, it kind of feels like there was nothing more to be done with Matrix trilogy.
It was fucking over.
Yeah. And I'd like to hear your guys' opinions on that. Because, like, when it comes to, like, you can talk specifically about the Matrix, but I just wanted to bring that example up because it's one of the most recent ones that's, you know, in my head, right? Like, it's, from the first trailer, it's nice seeing, like, Keanu Reeves and Carrie-Anne Moss again, but why? And I mean, I know some of the more obvious reasons why, you know, the Matrix is a bankable franchise still, but
right,
you know, like rhetorically, why?
To add on to just the Matrix, because there's many things that happen with this, and Marie-Soleil just whispered this one in my ear: the Mummy. Is holy shit.
Do we want to bring up the Lord of the Rings remake that's going on right now too, or whatever it is?
That's coming out.
Remake.
I don't actually know what it is.
Show, but it looks really bad.
Yeah, so
I'll give it a chance. I think it could be.
Isn't it made by Amazon?
The dwarf doesn't have beard.
It is made by Amazon.
No, give nothing made by Amazon a chance. Anyways, so speak about like that cashing in on old nostalgia. It's like, we made this really fine wine. It has aged very well. Let's make another bottle of wine and slap the same label on it and call it the old bottle of wine. I would have been okay with The Matrix if it wasn't a continuation. If we take that concept, throw in some new actors, throw in a new plot, and a new interesting twist about The Matrix this time around, I would have preferred that. Still would probably not have done as good as the original, but that would have been okay. But to mention Star Wars, sorry, Brooke, once again, we made this perfect, beautiful, fun thing. Let's add wine to the wine. Why not? Mummy 3, New Matrix, Star Wars sequels. Good God.
I mean, I also mentioned Fantastic Beasts earlier, so there's also that one.
Yep.
Which, yikes.
Well, the New Matrix was stupid because it's like they had sorry, my mouth is a little dry. I'm having trouble speaking. I'm gonna get some water in a second. But the Matrix 4 was bullshit because it's like they had the fucking template for like a potential new Matrix sitting right there. The Animatrix was like a great new addition to the Matrix, and they could have just done that as a new Matrix movie. Not that specifically, but like different shit in the Matrix. Just weird shit going on. It didn't have to be Neo or Trinity. It didn't have to be like a sequel or a follow-up. Just like use the concept. And then Matrix 4. And God, okay, has anyone else seen the Matrix 4?
No.
Or the Matrix Let's Get Started?
Is that a music video? What?
No, that's a
I've seen the Animatrix
reference.
and the original trilogy, and that's it.
As a devout Matrix sequel defender, yeah, the Matrix Revolution, the Matrix Let's Get It Started is a nightmare of retconning, and it's like it's probably one of the worst examples of like going back and fucking up a story to manufacture your way into having a new one. Because, like, okay, for those of you who haven't seen the Matrix sequels, I'm going to spoil them. No one cares. They die. Neo and Trinity they're fucking dead. They're super dead. You can maybe finagle an argument for how Neo could have survived because, like the way that he dies is a little bit He gets brain deleted in the Matrix world because he destroyed the Smith virus, but like Trinity got impaled with a fucking piece of space rhubarb. She's dead. She's super dead.
Mm-hmm.
And like it's and they go through this whole nonsensical bullshit thing to bring them back, and also to like they have this like really long exposition sequence to explain how there's still a conflict, because also at the end of Matrix 3 they make peace with the robots. They have the whole thing where they've made peace with the robots and everything's okay now, and they have to go through this whole exposition sequence to be like, oh yeah, well, we made peace, but then there was a robot civil war, so now there's two robot factions, and one of them's good and one of them's bad. So now we have good robots and bad robots. And it's like it's kind of a neat concept. I would actually like to see that movie. I would like to see the movie about that. If they just made a movie that had no Keanu Reeves, no Carrie-Anne Moss, just was about the fucking robot civil war, I'd fucking watch that. But no, that doesn't have Keanu Reeves. Keanu Reeves is he's a bankable name right now. So we have to magic bullshit our way to get Neo back.
Not a slight off topic, but it is talking about like unnecessary sequels. I can never believe that the Terminator series will ever end, because they're just gonna find some way of like nonsensically time traveling to some magical retcon and starting or trying to revive I don't want to say dying franchise, but just like
dead franchise.
Yeah.
Dead.
Like, yeah, so just I fully agree with you though, Gabe, like to go off of what you're talking about. Yeah, just I really appreciate when they take like stories that when they take worlds and kind of expand on it through new characters. It annoys me so much when they just go back, or you know, when they like with what you were saying, where they just kind of like just introduce the new characters in a completely different time setting for a quote unquote new story, but really it's just, you know, like not really adding much to anything. And you know, cash grab and all of the financial aspect aside for just a minute, like when a story ends for a certain character, like whether they're dead or they're retiring or they just like resign being the protagonist, the only logistical reason for a character at that point to even be brought up again is to continue someone else's story, I think. Like, and maybe that's just my thing. Maybe that's just maybe that's just like how I like certain stories, like when protagonists become legacy characters, basically. Like, it's what I really appreciated in Legend of Korra, where they had, you know, like where they didn't just have Katara and Aang and Sokka, like and Toph, like they didn't just outright write these characters off, but let them play into influential roles for Korra and for everyone else. That's a really good way of, like, you know, keeping them relevant, but also making them fresh. Like
this reminds me of like some of the issues people have with the continuation of like the Percy Jackson universe. Or, you know, you had the first five books that were about Percy, and then you had the next 5 books which Percy was also a main character in, and then you have the 5 Trial of Apollo books where Percy's like kind of there. And like I remember when the first Trials of Apollo book came out, and everyone was just like, leave Percy alone, give him a break, his story is over. And it's just one of those things where it's like, when something keeps going, what do you do with your with your characters if their story is complete?
Yeah.
Also,
go ahead.
Sorry, what, Dean?
Oh no, I do have something to say, but I'll speak on that later.
Okay, I was just gonna say, can we also talk about Supernatural while we're on this topic? This is like a really big issue in like TV shows where a show will be popular enough that it'll keep getting renewed long past the point it should have ended. Like Supernatural, when I brought this up to my mom earlier, she mentioned Grey's Anatomy, which is like the same thing, where just like these shows that have like 15, 20 seasons when they don't need them. And they really suffer for it usually.
Mm-hmm.
I agree, and I just want to touching on sequels. Also, I love something you said, Dean. Hop into the time machine and go to the magical retcon land for Terminator. It's not even a time machine anymore. It's literally just a retcon machine. H.G. Wells retcon machine. Again, it goes back to planning, I think. If your sequel isn't planned, then it probably shouldn't just be shoehorned in there. Know what I mean?
Yep.
Like with the Terminator sequels, never planned. With the Matrix sequel, that wasn't planned. With the Mummy sequel, the third one, the second one was kind of okay. Was never planned. Like, eventually you got to realize it's run its course. Stop shoehorning things in. But I want to discuss one good example of this, which is actually The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. It's called the Trilogy of 5 because he wrote a trilogy and then wrote 2 more books. And if you've never read The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, you should, because it's about the only way that sequels that are unplanned could actually be good. I don't have any specific examples. It's been years since I've read them. I just remember that, like, it's actually pretty good because though they weren't planned, they naturally evolved off of the story. And that's a huge importance with sequels, is a natural evolution. You can't keep just throwing bigger and badder threats at poor Percy Jackson. Let the man rest. Let him have catharsis as well as the reader, because the characters get it too. As much as they become real people in our minds, they deserve their ending just as much as we deserve to hear about their ending or read about their ending.
Mm-hmm.
And that also brings me to the topic of power creep, which is a problem with sequelization, a really big problem. The fact that we have to keep having a bigger and badder threat cheapens everything that comes before it every time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's definitely like a huge issue with Supernatural, where, like, you know, season 5 ends with like the literal apocalypse between heaven and hell, and then it keeps going and going and going.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like at a certain point, you're just like, what more could they possibly face that was worse than what they've come before?
Yeah. It's certainly, I think, a recurring issue with CW shows. Like, I only really have authority to speak on The Flash because that's the one that I remember best. But where the fuck do you go with The Flash after Flashpoint? Or after ending a season with Flashpoint? Nope, everything's fixed by the end of the first episode in the next season. What? Or at least it's pseudo implied because they thought that they were being smart about it. It's like, yeah, everything's back to normal, but not really. Fuck off.
Wasn't that like a big thing in the
it's
that, like, before Flashpoint? Like, they had all these, like, or not. I don't remember. Was Flashpoint one of the crossover episodes, or was it just The Flash?
It's just The Flash. And the thing is, like, oh, sorry, Alex, go ahead.
I was just gonna say there's the one crossover episode. I don't remember what it was called, but it was like in all of the individual shows there were all these like big issues building up, and then the like crossover episode happened, and then they like got combined into one universe, and then they're just like all the problems that were there before are just like not an issue now, and they have different issues.
Mm-hmm.
Why?
Yeah, and like I was gonna say, I certainly can't speak on like Flashpoint from a comics perspective, but from what I know about Flashpoint in the comics, it's arguably one of DC's biggest events in their canon. So to have it like shown pretty early into the seasons, or into the series' life, might I add, and for it to just kind of be taken away as soon as like the new season starts, it's like, what the fuck? What why?
So that they could catch people's attention and then not have to deal with the This is literally what happened on Riverdale. Is they ended season 5 with a literal explosion, and then immediately we're like, well, we don't want to have to deal with that, so we're just gonna write an alternate universe so we can write it out of existence.
Plan your damn sequels. Plan your follow-ups. Don't throw a dart at a dartboard at the end of the last book and say, hey, this is what happens.
Basically, the whole point of this is to say that writing involves planning. Do it.
Mm-hmm.
Do the work.
Mm-hmm. To kind of start winding down my section of this episode as host, let's talk about how we as writers write endings, and how everything that we've been talking about, how do we kind of consider our stories endings. And this is interesting because, like, you know, I can't speak for everyone, but my story, the one that I'm working on right now, the one that I've talked about numerous times on podcast, isn't finished.
They're hard.
Only write the beginning and middle, never finish your stories, collect a giant pile of manuscripts that you will never complete, and then die. That's my plan.
He shouldn't die.
I will. That first step's a little off my topic, Brooke, but I'll consider it. No, for me, the most catharsis in my writing is death. It's in the short story I'm currently writing, The Last Journey of the Oresteia. It's called The Last Journey of the Oresteia. Everyone dies. You get to live with them for a little bit and have some fun with them and like them. But you know from the onset that they're going to die. And again, I'm stealing right from Shakespeare with that one. I love a solid framing device. I love solid foreshadowing. My endings usually involve some form of either hardcore sacrifice or understandable death, including other stories in the mythic cosmos and plenty of other stories that I'd planned and may never finish. I love it. I love the Pyrrhic sacrifice. I love martyrdom and all of that good shit. Because guess what? They're not coming back from the fucking dead.
Mm. Yeah. So, as for me, my story, I'm in a really difficult position because it's a story that I obviously want to continue, so it can't feel too conclusive yet. But I know that one of my main goals, when I do reach the ending, because I have the ending planned out, is trying to make sure that everything just makes sense leading up to it. And maybe that's how I am as a writer, already. I'm pretty sure you guys know this already, but I constantly go back to previous plot points or previous chapters and just kind of rewrite everything that would eventually kind of lead to the conclusion that I want, whether it's through the chapter or it's through the act specifically, or whether it's just for the overall narrative of the story. It's a bad habit. I acknowledge that as a bad habit because I shouldn't be doing that. I should just I should just write first and then edit later. But
I was gonna say, Dean, this is why you're not done writing it yet.
Thanks, Alex.
Also because you don't show up to productivity chat. Ding, ding, ding.
So
it's just the call out midnight, I guess.
So among many valid reasons as to why I'm not done that story yet, the way that I think about endings is like I have it in mind. It's just so many different things eventually kind of keep me from getting there, and it bugs me. Like, it bugs me so much, but at the same time, I'm like, the ending is still the ending. I haven't really changed it yet. And yeah, the way that I write endings, or at least like that's with my main story, with like the things that I have completed though, like whether it's just poetry, like for myself, which I haven't written in a long time, or whether it's a short story or anything, like it's supposed to feel like I aim for it to be conclusive. I never plan for anything short specifically to ever kind of expand into anything, because that's what my novel's for.
Yeah. For me, the Diamond Dagger is the one that comes to mind. I know exactly how that story ends. I've known exactly how it ends before I had like pretty much the rest of it figured out. I've always known how it, like, some of the like specific details have changed over time, but like that story's ending has not changed in more than a decade. The rest of my stories I can't quite say the same for. Because like, when I talk about like the Diamond Daggers ending, I do mean like just the one book. I don't know how like the rest of the series will end. At this point, I'm working towards that. But like, I think it's really important to know even just how like an individual story will end before you like get the rest of it. I mean, like, you need to know how to continue it, obviously, but just like that individual ending is so important to know. Like, same with Crown, honestly, like Crown Upon My Head. I know how the first book ends. I don't know how the third book ends, but I know how the first book ends. And that's a good start. I have a hard time with endings, like I said, which I think is mostly because I tend to write very long stories. Like, my stories are all like novels, series of novels usually. And so like knowing the ending is very difficult for me because like there's so much to fill in. But like one thing I think is important is to have a sense of it. Like, you can write and see where it takes you, sure, but I think when you're coming up with ideas, you need to like have a sense of the conclusion that you want for each of your characters, and find a way to like build towards that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like it's kind of good to even just like have a general idea, and I'm not speaking for you, Alex, but to expand on that, like if you don't know what your ending is yet, then having some kind of thing, having just even an idea about how it'll end, especially for like for a novel too, like it's something that I've had to like understand too, because like if you're going to be starting off a new fantasy world where many people aren't familiar with how things work yet, and introducing them to a lot of very interesting characters that they aren't familiar with yet, but will eventually, grow to love during the course of the story, an ending for that, even if it's meant to just set up another story, it has to be considered as like for more than like 5 minutes. Like, it has to be
more, yeah.
Yeah, like a lot more, obviously. And the fact is, like, a lot of like fantasy is susceptible to a lot of familiarity with one another, and I say that like, there's always like in fantasy stories, there's always elves, dwarves, or variations of such. There's magic. There's a lot of familiarity with fantasy stories. So trying to stay fresh is hard, but through the ending, I think like the ending is not the be all end all of making your own story fresh, but it certainly helps sets a good standard for the rest of your stories, right? And that's how I kind of think of it. Like,
and also, like, we talked earlier a little bit about endings having to match their genres, and I think that's something else to know is like, if you want your story to end tragically, then that's going to work its way into the rest of your story. If you know that, like, that's just going to happen naturally. And if it doesn't, then you probably want to fix that. Whereas if you want a happy ending, then that's also going to, like, naturally, like, how you end a story is going to affect the tone of the story as well, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Happy endings, what are those?
I see. The thing is, I like happy endings, but I'm very bad at writing them.
I like
my
happy endings
characters
too.
get nothing.
No,
Yeah,
I
My
tend.
characters are vessels of misery and trauma.
My actual preferred endings, though, are tend to be ones that are kind of, like, ambiguous. I really like stories that end and make you question everything you've just read or watched. That's always really fun. And then, like, ones where it's like it could be interpreted in different ways about, like, where it's going from there.
Mm-hmm.
These tend to work better, I find, in like really well in, like, short stories and, like, one act plays. There's so many one act plays I've seen that end in, like, such a way that are just really satisfying.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, again, endings vary depending on genre, but, like, there's definitely different styles, and they're going to affect the story that you want to tell.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Brooke, Gabe, how about you guys? How do you write endings?
I think of it pretty early on. Like, I'll have an idea for a story, and, like, the rest of it will follow fairly quickly. Just like, this is where I want the story to end up. Not super great with, like, acts and breaking them down into parts, because, like, I know how the entire series of Zayla will end. Not, like, necessarily, like, the first book. But it is important for me to know where I'm going with the story. And it doesn't even matter if, like, it changes while I'm writing. It's just, like, I just need to have an idea to help it flow. And then if this ending does change based on what I'm writing in the story, then it makes it feel even more natural. So I welcome that.
I think that's something else to keep in mind too, is chances are, like, no matter how meticulous of a planner you are before you start writing a story, as you write it, things are probably going to change a little bit. Maybe they'll change a lot a bit. It doesn't matter. Things are probably going to change, and I think that's something to embrace.
Mm-hmm.
Like, as you, like, figure out, like, the specific details of something, and then you're like, well, it would make more sense if instead of this happening, this happened, and that would explain how I get to this ending better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Gabe, how about you then?
Let's just we talked about, like, happy endings and, like, super dark endings. I feel like my favorite type of ending to write is, like, bittersweet. Like my favorite type to write and to read is like a bittersweet ending. Like, because I do feel like, I mean, especially in the stories that I write, and, like, horror stories are usually my exception, because most of my horror stories usually have either, like, an ironic ending or, like, an ending where things are resolved, but then there's a lingering fuckery afoot. But with my long-term stories, with the endings that I usually plan are, like, I like to write them bittersweet. I like to, like, make them a happy-ish ending on, like, a more literal level. Like, the events are a happy ending, but, like, thematically, I love endings that are bittersweet and sort of leave you with, like, a sort of a sad feeling. Like, and not just because, like, a story's ending, but also because, like, the way it's ending is a little bit sad. It's satisfying, but it's like it's just a little maybe it's tragic, maybe it's because there was a big sacrifice, maybe it's just because the way that the events are portrayed is just, like, depressing. That's the shit that fucking gets me, and I love writing that. I love writing that stuff. Both I don't want to spoil the actual content of either endings, because I've worked like I spent, like, the whole reason I haven't finished Lemonheart at the rate I promised I would is because I spent, like, all deliberating on, like, the third act. But But yeah, I wanted to write a very bittersweet, melancholy ending for Love and Heart, and that's sort of like the type of ending I like to write.
Mm-hmm.
I'm liking your terminology, Gabe, because that's a type of ending I also enjoy, though I find I have a lot of trouble writing, is one where the character doesn't get what they want, but gets what they need.
Yes.
Right?
Yes,
and I think
that's the perfect way to put it.
Yeah, I think that's kind of what you're going for, because I feel that too, and I love reading stories like that. Hard time writing stories like that, I really do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I do too. That's why this goddamn story has taken so long.
Mm-hmm.
Ironically, I feel like that's the opposite of how the Diamond Dagger ends. She gets what she wants. She does not get what she needs.
Now she needs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just I think like for me, in the direction that Xeno's going in, it's gonna be pretty bittersweet. And like my one concern personally is I know what happens, and I know how it affects like like Porter's relationship with pretty much everyone moving forward with Xeno's canon, but just trying to make sure that it still makes sense for her character up until that point. Like, I think what I'm trying to get at is just, does it, would this ending still kind of, not just provide more intrigue with the story, but make sense for her character? And like, for those who have been listening, for those who, like for you guys and for everyone who's been listening, me talk about Xeno, like the character focus is really important for me, and I just hope that the ending that I have in mind right now, the one that I'm going to write, like, would it make sense for her? If that makes any sense. So that's maybe like my own kind of like, thoughts on that. Because it feels bittersweet. I want it to be bittersweet, but like, would it make sense for that? Like, would it make sense for my character to do that?
Right.
Yeah, which can be hard, but I mean, that's why there are some stories that do it right, and there are some stories that kind of do it wrong. So to talk about specifics, we'll now move into case studies where Alex will take over as host.
Oh, I'm taking over. How exciting. Okay, who's ready to get into shape?
Sorry, what?
Okay. Oh, wow.
The only shape is human. I don't want to be any other shape.
That was 5 seconds. You were host for 5 seconds.
No, I think we can jump right into some examples. Do we want to just continue the talking order we've been going in, which is the bottom up?
I resent being known as the bottom.
Then you shouldn't have changed your name to the end.
It actually works out really well, and now I do not regret it. All right, I can start, yeah. So. Decided not to talk about music and the endings to songs being important, because that in itself is a type of ending, but not necessarily the one I want to discuss. I want to talk mainly about the King Killer Chronicles by Patrick Rothfuss. They've been out for a while. There's going to be spoilers. I don't give a fuck. It has a beautiful framing device, which is something I mentioned earlier, and something it uses so fucking well. Oh my god. And I've seen others try to copy it, and I've seen one person copy it and do quite well with it. The framing device is simple. A historian has come to find our retired hero and write down their story. Seems pretty cliche. Except it's not the beginning and the end of the book. There are interlude chapters, a couple of them spaced throughout. And the beginning and ending framing device chapters of each of the 2 books that are out are actually really long and full of story. It's very interesting. You could strip the interlude chapters out of the book and create your own book just out of them. They're that good and that full of interesting questions, story bits, and their own characters. But it's just the framing device that wraps around the regular book. And now that I've talked about enough of the book, since the book ends each time with the framing device, there's almost like 2 endings per book. There's the ending of the story that's being told each book, and then the ending through the frame. And they're both super satisfying every time, because you hear the characters talk about where they're ending that story during the framing device. It's the strangest double catharsis, but it is so good. And specifically to reference the end of the second book, the character who's telling the story, our hero, Kvoth, decides to end it there and stop. And he specifically says a line, I don't have it in front of me, but it's something along the lines of, I think that's a good place to stop for the day. To stop telling the story where me and my friends are all happy and content for a time. Because when we start back up telling this story again, things will not be that way. And they won't be that way again. And that is such a fucking drop. Because you go from seeing these characters, again, happy and content in the story that's being told, to the framing device telling you that no, this isn't what's actually going to happen. We're ending it here to end happy right now, but next season, next episode, next book, it's not going to be like that. And but problem being, he's now set up a sequel, the third, the supposedly final in the Kingkiller Chronicles trilogy. It's been a while. It's been a long while. And I don't know if we're ever going to get it. And this is a very popular book in a lot of circles. It's even referenced in a TV show here or there, if I remember correctly. Patrick Rothfuss is pretty good. He's written some video games now. I've done a few side stories and stuff. But there's a lot of hype around the third book. And he's got a lot of story threads to wrap up. And I've said it, I think, once already, but the expectation might kill it. Or it might never finish, simply because there's too much expectation. You can tell he's planned an ending. Again, he spoils it in the fucking name, The Kingkiller Chronicles. He kills a king. He does a lot more than that, actually, that's spoiled many times. There's a line in there that's something like, to find the girl he loved, he had to kill an angel to get her, and then fight a demon to keep her, or something like that. I'm misquoting it horribly. But again, it spoils absolutely everything. And you die trying to figure out who each of the people are referencing is. We all know who the female is in question now. By the end of the second book, she's now a more prominent character, though she barely exists in the first, which is very interesting. But he set up so much. And I'm at the point where, like, dude, write me a 20-page short story in jot form summarizing what you wanted to finish, and just finish it. I'm at the point where that would be enough catharsis for me. I am that built up and pent up about this fucking story. I don't care. Don't live up to the expectation. I don't want you to anymore. I just want you to finish it so you don't have this weight hanging over your head. But that's my big example. Best fucking catharsis ever. With, again, a dual framing device set up for the next book and everything, all fucking immaculate. And now we wait. Well, if you haven't yet, read those 2 books. Name of the Wind and Wise Man's Fears. Fucking read them. They're
on my list.
Is it not high enough on the list, apparently?
I have to read Margaret Atwood for school first.
Oh, The Handmaid's Tale, or which one?
All of them.
Oh my god!
Oh, wow.
No. We're only reading 5 of them, but that's still too many.
Okay. There's my really good example. That's, again, still one of my top books ever. But.
Cool. Well, Dean, I think that means you're next.
Sweet. Just a question before we begin, because I'm now stuck between what I want to talk about. Do you know if we would be having time for a second round of picks potentially?
I'm gonna talk about all of mine at once, so just go for it, dude.
Okay, so if we're going to talk about all of it at once, as an honorable mention, because I talked about this already in a previous episode, but the ending of Encanto really, really bugs me. It bugs me a lot more than it should, because I know why they ended it that way. It's supposed to be a nice feel-good ending, as is a lot of movies that are for children, especially. But for someone who loves Disney musicals, like, from a plot perspective, it was the magic that was tearing the family apart slowly anyway. Why give it back? And that's maybe just my own personal nitpick. Like, I acknowledge that it's just my own personal nitpick, but really just, I really, really would have loved if they just decided to live life as a community, all relying on and trusting each other, rather than just, a constant cloud of expectation over this one family, right? That the community and themselves put themselves through. That's a lot of weight, and to have that off their shoulders by the end of the movie, only for it to come back at the end of the movie, what? But to talk now about my specific examples, the two that I wanted to talk about, the first one I'll acknowledge is a pretty recent thing that I should have been on for a long time. That's Black Mirror. I really, really, really enjoy the fact that Black Mirror's stories are not tied into each other, or at least the ones that I've watched so far. I'm just gonna try to quickly pull up some episodes, but like the ones that I've seen, I think okay, I can't really remember like the specific episodes off the top of my head, but the one where it was of Bryce Dallas Howard as this obsessed social media influencer, or like someone who is on social media wanting to get more likes. The way that ends felt really conclusive and really nice. The one of this of a child killer, or like an accomplice to a child murder, and this theater group or something essentially set up this never-ending loop of torture that eventually starts all the way back at the beginning. That's fucked, but that's cool as fuck at the same time. And I think another one too where these two characters meet in an online world. San Junipero, I think that's what the episode is called. And the motifs throughout Black Mirror and some of the things, like the influence with sci-fi and technology that is either too good to be true or existing solely for the plot. That is what helps make Black Mirror, but it's not some kind of clear continuity between like episode by episode, and I love that so much. Each story, whether it is like under an hour or a little bit over an hour, feels conclusive, and that's what makes it such an enjoyable thing to watch, because you don't have to watch whole seasons. You don't have to watch whole seasons to catch up and watch season 5. You can watch an episode from season 5 and then watch your favorite episodes from the seasons before then without missing a thing. And that's awesome. You don't really get that much anymore, because everything, or a lot of like big franchises, love to be connected. They love to have a long central continuity, and that's fine. Like, that's good for someone like me who loves long running narratives, but there's just something special about like short and sweet conclusive stories that makes it special. And in modern media, I think the appeals to sci-fi, the big name actors that they get with it, the wide varieties in stories that Black Mirror shares is what makes it a pretty recent favorite. And it's a really good it's a top tier show for me. And it's an example of doing endings correctly, because it just helps make each episode of Black Mirror and Black Mirror as a whole feel special. That being said, on continuity, the God of War series, as if I haven't talked about this series enough on this podcast, is my favorite example of like these stories kind of like ending and going into each other. And I kind of speak more for God of War 2018 rather than, you know, the original hack and slash games, because the original hack and slash games just made Kratos angrier and progressed the plot so that he could eventually just take down Zeus, and that was the end goal. Like that's the end for the series, and as an end goal, that allows you to make more games within the franchise, and that makes sense. Like there's nothing wrong with that, but it's the way that God of War 3 ends and essentially kind of concludes, quote unquote, the story of Kratos that is interesting, because at that point everyone was done with God of War. And speaking on history, when God of War Ascension came out, for those who aren't aware of it, at that point it was the same game, it was the same formula, it was just set at a different time before the ending of 3. And when you go back into history, knowing that the story's over, like, why would you need to, right? But then came God of War 2018. And with God of War 2018, it continued Kratos' story, somehow still making him the main protagonist, but not making it all about him anymore, because now he has his son Atreus. He now has a new environment, he now has a new mindset. It is a completely different character, and that is so refreshing. And that is, like, I've been saying that a lot during this episode, but just it feels just so new yet so familiar at the same time. And that's more along a commentary on how a story begins and how a franchise continues. So to speak on God of War 2018's ending, that I think is where it sets up a new like chapter for everyone. Like it sets up this new direction for Kratos as a character. It sets up the future for Atreus. It sets up Atreus's future. It sets up inner conflicts between Kratos and Atreus, as well as some of the characters that they had met throughout their original journey. It is still inherently God of War, but the ending to it concludes the main game story, acknowledges the past of its hack and slash origins, while still progressing and opening a whole new world of storytelling. And that's awesome. Like, I could gush about God of War 2018 in an H-bomb style video essay if I wanted to, but there was just so much right with God of War 2018. And since we're talking about endings, I am so excited for God of War Ragnarok to see where that story continues and how that story ends, because they know what they're doing. Santa Monica knows what they're doing when it comes to this property, and I am really, 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 really interested to see just how they like continue expanding on the mythos and the legacy that is like Kratos. That's so fascinating.
Cool. So some more good examples from Dean. Guess that brings me to my turn. I'm going to start with my good examples and then move into my disappointing / bad examples. So when I was trying to think up case studies, for some reason, the first thing that came to mind for me of like all the books I own, all the shows and movies I've ever watched, is this one book that I read in high school and haven't touched since. It's called Boy Meets Boy by David Levithan. It's like a YA contemporary about this dude named Paul and the boy he falls in love with. And I don't read a lot of YA contemporary, but like having read a summary of this novel before we started recording, it's a very typical YA contemporary in that, you know, you've got the main character, he's got like a love interest, there's romantic drama, whatever. He has some friends, each of them are going through things in their lives. And I don't remember much about actually like reading the book, but I do remember putting the book down when I finished it and being like surprised at how much I liked the ending. And I think this is kind of comes to mind when we talk about knowing when to end a story. Because there's a lot that goes on in the background of this book. You know, like one of the guy's friends has like shitty parents that he's trying to get away from or deal with. One of his friends is like in a shitty relationship with a guy, and there's like tension there, and you know they're trying to maintain their relationship, but they're struggling because of, you know, teen issues and stuff. But the story's not about them. You know, the story's about Paul, and it's about his relationship with this guy. And so like those side plots that are so important aren't like resolved by the end of the story, but the story that matters in the novel is resolved. And there was no scrambling to like tie up all the loose ends, you know? It told the story it wanted to, and it had all these like other things going on, but like, you know, it felt very much like a life goes on kind of story, you know? It's like, this is how this ends. Is there other stuff going on? Sure, but that's not what matters here. And I just remember being like really satisfied by that. The other good example I pulled up is the TV show The Good Place. I think that this is an example of a show that knew where it wanted to end and it committed to it. And I mean, the ending of that show, like happy tears. It was so perfect. It felt like the perfect conclusion to every character's arc. So yeah, The Good Place. It's a good show. You should watch it. Then I want to talk about my disappointing example, which is, I talked about Percy Jackson earlier. I want to talk about the Magnus Chase trilogy, which is also by Rick Riordan. First book was really good. I really enjoyed it. Second book, also really good. Introduced one of my like all-time favorite characters with Alex Fierro, who is wonderful, and I love her so much. Then there is The Ship of the Dead, which is the third book. And I remember reading this book and hitting like the halfway point and immediately telling that there was something up. Like, it felt so rushed to me. Like at some point, like the obstacles that the characters had to overcome were being overcome like that, like just instantly. There was barely any struggle, and things were just like moving on and moving through. And then it got to the end, and I was like, this is supposed to be a trilogy, right? Why does it feel like it didn't end? So I was really disappointed by the ending to the Magnus Chase trilogy because I really enjoyed the rest of it. But I feel like the ending was super rushed, which could be because Rick Riordan was releasing like 2 books a year at that time. So it was probably rushed, and that's why it felt like that. But yeah, so that's my disappointing example. A couple bad examples. I just 2 more and then I will move on. I'm sorry, I have so many to talk about. Another random one the Splintered Trilogy by A.G. Howard. Picked up the first one once when I was going to the dentist, and was fascinated instantly because it's like an Alice in Wonderland inspired story. First book felt complete, and then she released 2 more, which was already kind of disappointing, but whatever. Second book was fine. Third book was fine. My actual issues with the book is how the love story was concluded. And we haven't really talked much about like love stories in this, and that's fine. But like, basically what happens in this book is there's a love triangle, or in this series there's a love triangle, classic YA fantasy. She doesn't choose, but it's also not like she doesn't choose and they become polyamorous. It's like she marries one of them, waits for him to die, then goes to Wonderland and marries the other one. And
All right.
Have your cake and eat it too, I guess.
It was very disappointing to me because I was just like, it was just like this whole setup for this, and then I just felt like it felt really cheap, I guess. You know, like we complain about love triangles a lot on this channel. And like, you know, it's hard to do a love triangle in a satisfying way. This is not how you do it. I mean, I feel like if you're not going to make them choose, then like go the polyamory route, because God knows we need more of that in the world.
I actually think God would disagree with you on that, but like I'll let you and him fight it out.
I will definitely fight God on that. Also, polyamory. We're not talking
fight
about
yourself then.
We're not going to have this conversation right now. We can talk about religion after the podcast. But like, genuinely, I think if you're going to make her choose and like commit to it, you know? Does that make sense? Am I the only one that thinks it's weird that she like waited for one guy to die so she could date the other one?
Yeah, that's kind of weird.
Yeah, it's weird.
Yeah.
Commit, coward.
Yeah. Anyway, the last thing I want to talk about real quick is Cassandra Clare. And a trend that I have noticed especially in some of her latest books, which first, Tyler and I were talking about this earlier, where it really feels like she didn't have ideas for the sequels and was just writing them because she wanted more money. But like, one thing I noticed, especially in the Dark Artifices series in particular, is nothing happens in her books. Like literally nothing happens in them. There's like this meandering plot where like you get to see some of the characters do stuff and you're like, oh wow, look at them talking and fighting demons together. And then in like the last like couple of chapters, the pace like picks up and there's this big epic fight and a bunch of people die and then the book ends. And you're like, oh my God, what a cliffhanger. I need to find out what happens next. So you go wait for the next book and you pick it up and it's the same thing. There's just this meandering plot line for like 500 fucking pages because her books are so fucking long now. And then like nothing happens. And then in like the last couple chapters, there's this big fight and a bunch of people die. And you're like, oh my God, a cliffhanger. And I hate this style of writing. It's so manipulative. Like, don't do this.
Just at Stephen Moffat.
Do you want to expand on that?
I fucking hate and think maybe I'm just like referring to H-Bomb's video a little bit too much, but from what I remember of one particular video from H-Bomb's, which is, you know, the Sherlock episode or the Sherlock video, it bugs me now when like when your showrunner or your writer is trying to imply something, is trying to make you think like, oh shit, this is thing. This is going to be so fucking cool. You better keep on watching. Nothing ever happens.
You mean you don't like being teased for like a whole season, Dean?
It's not even about being teased at that point, Tyler. You're literally a mouse chasing like cheese on a string.
Well, so
right into a mouse trap.
Here's the point of teasing is eventually you get release. And this should be true of any type of teasing.
Yeah.
Including literary.
Yeah. No, that was that. I do remember this discussion and that that's like what he did when he was the writer of Doctor Who, which was when I stopped watching Doctor Who, for the record, because Stephen Moffat is a horrible writer. But like it's literally, he did this in Sherlock too, though, where like, you know, an episode would like it's in the end of season 1, I think, where there's like this whole thing where they're in the pool and Moriarty's there and you're like, oh my God, they're gonna die, and then nothing happens and they're fine. Like, like this is something that I think, like, Riverdale also comes to mind, like the episode I mentioned earlier, but even like the ending of the first season of Riverdale does this, where they do something really big and dramatic and that makes you go, oh my God, I need to see what comes of this. And then like nothing happens, because the only reason it's there is to make you keep watching or to make you keep reading. But the problem with writing like this is that eventually your readers are going to catch on and they're gonna stop. If you're gonna have a cliffhanger, you need to earn it. That's my point. Anyway, Brooke, it's your turn.
Okay. My turn. All right. I'll start also good. I do like a little bit of ambiguity. So one of my favorite movies of all time is Inception. Because that's still a widely debated ending. Like, is he actually awake or is he still dreaming right now? And it's like, I don't know. But I like it. But I don't think like too many movies or TV shows or books do this. Not that I've read anyway. But the easiest way to do it is to have something like a dreamscape or like other place that you go to and you can like, it's hard to differentiate the two. And that's personally something I would love to do, because any form of that appearing once in a novel will instantly make me think like, oh, this could come back. This could be a thing. And I'd love to see more of that. So I really like Inception and that kind of style of, it's kind of up in the air if it's a good ending or not. Another ending I like is one that's conclusive and stands on its own, even if there's room for more. And my example for that is, of course, Star Wars New Hope, because that was never really supposed to be a trilogy or the massive thing that it is today. He made it to just be that movie. He's like, I don't know how people are going to take this. This is the age of cowboys, and I'm bringing us up into space for a dramatic family samurai opera type deal. But he made it work because it's like one of the big bads is absolutely dead by the end of it. The other one is shot up into space. You can say, yeah, sure, he's dead. The big threat of the movie is destroyed. The heroes get medals. Woohoo, yeehaw, we're done. But it still makes sense when you pick up in the next one, being like, that second bad guy, he's still alive. That other bad guy, he's still alive. Time to fight some more. And it's good. And it works. And it is totally fine in my eyes that just have the ending that the original trilogy did, which was just a happy ending and everyone wins. The good guys win. They beat the space Nazis. Until they don't beat the space Nazis. Because the space Nazis were always there. Which is where the bad comes in Rise of Skywalker. I didn't have a problem with The Force Awakens. I really like The Force Awakens, personally. Just me. But I do. However, it does set up a few questions to be answered, which then don't get answered because we got a new director who decided to be like, fuck that. I'm going to do this my own way, which... But also the problem with J.J. Abrams is that he does like to do the mystery box thing, but he does it to himself. So he didn't actually, I don't think, figure out what he wanted the Skywalker trilogy to conclude in these sequels. He just kind of threw it out there. Then I got Ryan Johnson to do the next one, and then he had to pull back everything that he might have done in the second one to write the third in a conclusive manner that he liked, instead of building off of what had been put forward. And it's just goddamn awful, because the way that they try to fix everything is just pulling Palpatine out of fucking nowhere. The problem with not having everything planned out from the beginning is because there was no hints laid towards Palpatine's return. Even if there had been, I don't think it would have been good. They shouldn't do that. I hate that in in sequels, when they just revive the dead. Like, oh, this was a really good villain, we're just going to bring them back. He didn't need to be back. It completely obliterates the importance of Luke Skywalker's and Anakin Skywalker's stories, which were built in the original and the prequels. And they're just like, Palpatine's actually still alive. Darth Vader's sacrifice didn't mean fucking anything. Anakin didn't get his redemption. Here's Palpatine again, and instead of one Star Destroyer, it's a shit ton of ships that are now Star Destroyers. It's like, thanks, great, I love this. This is so fun. And they're so wound up in just trying to be big and exciting and really, like, a whole galaxy ending, that they don't even care about the characters by that point. And everyone's story just, like, gets dropped or, like, fucked up. And it's awful, because then we're left hanging where Finn's big arc didn't get resolved in the slightest. It didn't really even get built upon. Like, we already kind of had suspicions from The Force Awakens that he might be Force sensitive, and also going down the path of a Jedi with Rey. They heightened it a little bit in Rise of Skywalker, but they drop it like 3 times that he wants to tell Rey something important, and we guess that he's also Force sensitive, and it never gets said in the movie. Ever! You don't leave shit like that just in the air, dangling. You also don't make such a bad movie that you need a help guide book that you purchase to tell you what the fuck is going on, to tell you who these people are, to tell you what their connection was at the end. Why are they talking now and having this interesting leitmotif playing that's like, this means something significant. I didn't know it until the internet brought it to my attention. I was like, oh, great. Okay, thank you. Cool. You don't do that shit. You don't do that shit.
Yeah, I would agree that the story needs to be able to stand on its own, even if it is attached to something else or a continuation of something else.
Yeah.
Mhm.
The problem is that, like, people didn't like Force Awakens because it kind of felt like New Hope again, which I get, and that can also be like part of the problem with the sequels, is that it's just recycling and not telling a new story. Like, they definitely should have told a new story, because it basically was Luke's journey again, which is very upsetting. It could have been something new, and I'm very upset that they just stuck with the program and just been like, light side, dark side, bad, no gray Jedi, never gray Jedi. We don't do gray Jedi. So you just give me a fucking gray Jedi for now, please. Thank you.
Mhm.
We're just no Jedi. That was
You and I can fight about Grey Jedi later.
okay.
Sorry to cut you off, Brooke. I'll expand on my thing later.
Yeah. On a book note, because I don't want to rant about Star Wars too much, but on a book note, Divergent is one of those ones that pops to my head all the time. Every time I remember that she wrote the first book within her winter break from university. She just sat down during her winter break and was like, I'm going to pop out a book, and she did it. But then it was successful, and she's like, oh, I need this to do more things now. And she had to mash together a world that actually made sense and try and get a conclusion, which is why Elysium sucked, and that's just why they never got the second part of the last book produced. It's just the movies never got finished. And there are some cases where you can just like write and you get a good story and you get to a conclusion. But you really do need to plan. You need to take a little bit of time and like think about what's happening in your new world if you're building a new world.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then rant about Shatter Me. that just also goes back to the whole conclusion thing, and don't continue if it's concluded, because Shadow Me is far from a perfect series, but the first 3 books are fine. They tell a story and it's entertaining and it's conclusive. They kill the bad guy. Woo! And they do the pairing off. Whatever. And then they decide, nah, we're gonna make like 4 more books, 5 more books, 6 more books. Who knows? We're gonna keep going.
Wait, what?
I
thought it was a trilogy.
No.
You would think, like,
You do not keep going, because they literally bring back the guy that they kill in the last book. They're like, he's not actually dead. And then they go into this whole, like, there's more countries and shit, and your parents are actually from this ruling family on this other country, and they're going to kidnap you now and take you away. And here's all these other really cool, powered people from these high-ranking families, but you don't really get any character development with them. And it's just shit. It's shit. Like, you can't just do that.
Yeah, I remember I'm remembering now when I read everything up until everything when I read Shadow Me, Brooke. Yeah, I told you this, like, the first 3 books are pretty all right. Like, their thing. I didn't have like many complaints. Like, I think there were a couple of like typo issues that I remember talking to you about, but overall, like, yeah, it felt pretty conclusive. But then just something about continuing on, knowing like how much, like, I'll give credit where credit's due. Like, expanding the world and talking more about other countries is cool. Could you not have found, like, could Tara Mafi not have like found another protagonist to center it on? Because I feel like because I felt like with Juliet's story, it was pretty much done. Like, she's defeated the bad guy. Okay, cool.
It should have been. And then they just kept going, and like they did the whole Star Wars thing where it's just like, it's the whole world now. It's not just this country. It's like everyone, yada yada. Go fight these other bad guys. There's even more. And bringing back the original bad guys. Like, stop it.
Yeah.
This is one of the things that I think Lee Bardugo has been doing well with the Grishaverse, is you have like the original trilogy, which focuses on Alina, and then you have like the 6 of Crows books, which focus on this like entirely new cast of characters, and then you go into like the Nikolai trilogy, which is hard to talk about when someone hasn't read them yet. But, like, they focus on like a character from the first series that was well beloved and has like a new arc to go on, and like you have the villain thing as well, but I feel like it's like a fresh enough twist on it that it works.
I agree. Like, yeah, I commend like Lee Bardugo for expanding her universe, and not just through the lens of familiar characters, like literally just introducing new characters. That's awesome. Like, the work that you have to, like, the work that you put into making like Kaz and Inej and Jesper, as well as, finding ways to still integrate and talk about like Alina without it ever feeling forced, and all of it coming off naturally. Incredible stuff. Like, there is a whole thing, like there's like in a world, obviously there's so much to explore. You don't always have to explore it through the lens of your own character, or through the lens of one character.
Yeah, and this is something that like I'm hoping to do with my Katariana novels, is like are they all part of one continuous narrative to an extent? Sure, but I want them also to be like separate enough that they can exist on their own as well, And I think that's like one of the strengths of the Grishaverse books as they are, is you can read the 6 of Crows without reading any of the rest of it and still like fully understand the story. Like, sure, there's like Easter eggs and like references to the other books, but you don't like need to read them to understand what's happening.
Yeah, and I think, in the conversation of endings, like, you can always revisit like, you can revisit like the original trilogy, or the 6 of Crows duology, and probably be better than me and actually start reading the King of Scars duology too, or trilogy. Is it duology or trilogy, Alex?
It's a duology.
It's a duology. So, yeah.
Can you read it, Dean?
Okay. So, like, whatever the case, it's like Lee Bardugo's Grishaverse is a really good example of something that a lot of writers, especially writers like us within our genre, should kind of familiarize with ourselves with. Like, and you know, and to kind of tie it back into what Brooke was talking about, like with Star Wars and with Shatter Me, specifically, just because those are the ones that I'm really familiar with. Like there is a whole lot of lore and characters and world and you know, creatures, like all of that shit you can expand on and talk about, but you don't always have to do that through the lens of like beloved characters. Like, let them die. I think if we were
let them rest.
Yeah.
Introduce more characters for your readers to fall in love with.
Yeah. I'm ham-fisting this reference in, so forgive me, Gabe, but you don't have to pull in a meal and just keep one character alive for thousands of years.
I don't know what you're referencing.
I don't know what you're referencing either.
Emil, Nier Automata.
Emil, Nier Automata.
Oh!
How did I catch that before you, Gabe?
Yeah,
I didn't know. I don't know why. My first thought when you said Emil, are we talking about what redneck is named Emil in what redneck story?
I've never met a redneck named Emil.
Neither have I, but I don't know why. But like as soon as Emil, I was like, oh right, Emil the redneck. From what?
Anyway, Brooke, is that all your examples?
Well, I could like briefly talk about Belle because that was really recent, and really all I have to say is that it just ended up having like a lot of plot threads and kind of no explanation or like resolution to a lot of them, and also I just didn't like the ending because it was very unsatisfying. Like, do y'all care about spoilers for Belle?
No.
What the fuck is Belle?
It's an animated music movie.
I think that is so far outside of my wheelhouse, I will never see it. Spoil away.
Well, Belle is based on Beauty and the Beast, but in the metaverse, where everyone gets characters that hide who they are. So, like, you're not you. But the whole plot is basically like trying to reveal this character called the Beast because he's just been fucking people up. And they're like, we need to expose who this man is. And the main girl, Belle, is like, I want to help the Beast. He's clearly just an injured soul. I can fix him, kind of deal. And you think it's like romantic. You think maybe it's like her crush at school, but it's actually no. It's two random boys that are never part of like the main IRL story. They just kind of hunt them down on the internet, and they're like, these boys are being abused at home. And then the boys are live streaming for some reason. They find them on the live stream. They try talking to them. The dad comes in to start being a dick while they're on live stream. Yep, the dad leaves. The kids are like, we don't trust you. We don't think you're Belle. And she goes to the metaverse, exposes herself for her real self. And she's like, now you can trust me. And she live streams them, chats them again. They're just about to tell their location. And then the dad comes in and turns off the live stream. And they're like, oh no, where were they? And they do a little bit of sleuthing to find out where they are. Don't even track down the exact address. It's just kind of like a general area of like Tokyo. Wait, was it Tokyo? Like, it was a big city anyway.
It was Tokyo.
Yeah, like just a general area of Tokyo, fucking Tokyo. And they're like, hey, you child, you high school child, you like 14-year-old, you're going to go alone to Tokyo to stop this dad from hitting his children. And then she just does. She just goes and finds them, and they just happen to run outside when she's out on their street, and they have a big hug. But then the dad comes out, and she faces him, and she just stares at him, and he freaks out and starts like crying, and then runs off. And she's like, I saved the day. And then she goes back home and leaves the boys there. It's like, I'm sorry. What?
It seems like a clusterfuck.
Wow.
Yes. It was... I was so mad when it ended because like that wasn't fucking satisfying. You didn't really help those boys. You just stopped the attack in that moment. at one time.
That's all it takes to stop parental abuse, apparently, is you gotta look at your abuser for like 10 seconds.
Fucking guess so.
That ending is manic as fuck. It also has a shot where the dad, like, oh, sorry.
I was just saying, send children to protect children. There was like literally a group of adults in the room while they were discovering who the beast was. And they were just like, okay, bye, child. You go save them and don't go with her.
Yikes.
Oh, wow.
Gabe,
It was one of those endings. What's up?
continue.
I know. I was just saying, it's one of those endings where, like, I understand. Like thematically, I know like what they were going for. This is when I was talking yesterday. This is why I said like the ending gets a little goofy. The ending of this movie gets a little goofy. But it's definitely one of those endings where it's like thematically the director wanted to like have this ending to like tie up the themes, and then just like fuck logic, fuck everything else. I need to have. She needs to risk her life to save a stranger because her mom risked her life to save a stranger, and they need to have that. And like, on my second watch of the movie, I think I liked the ending more because I knew that it was gonna be ridiculous. Gonna be like, but yeah, it's wild.
Well, there we go. Anything else you want to talk about then, Gabe?
What? Oh, me? No. Oh, me? Oh,
no, the other Gabe in the chat.
I didn't realize we were switching it to my turn.
Go, Gabe.
Wait, Brooke, do you not have anything else you want to say?
Nope.
Okay.
Go, Gabe. Go, Gabe. Go, Gabe.
I didn't realize Belle was a segue. I was just commenting.
Segue.
I'm going. Give me a second. I'm pulling up my examples. I'm sick. Leave me alone.
He's sick. Get him.
No, don't get me. Okay. Guess what manga I'm going to talk about? Guess which one I'm going to talk about? It's Chainsaw Man.
You sure you don't want to talk about My Lie in April instead?
I haven't seen April.
Isn't it Your Lie?
I haven't seen.
Never read it.
I haven't seen the piano anime. I have seen the Chainsaw anime. I read it. The book. Chainsaw Man has. Okay, so I've talked in the past about how Chainsaw Man is really, really good, and it's ending. It's really, really good. Sorry. So
you okay?
Yeah, I'm fine. I'm all good. I'm just a little. I'm a little bamboozled.
Got it.
No. Chainsaw Man's ending is really, really good. Chainsaw Man. I talked earlier about how I really like endings where, as Tyler very, very eloquently put it, and I'm bad with words, so I'm just gonna quote you, Tyler. Where a character gets everything they need, but they don't get what they want. Chainsaw Man is very this. Throughout the whole third act of Chainsaw Man, it's just Denji literally basically losing everything. Everything goes fucking ass up in the last like 20 chapters of Chainsaw Man. It's one of the most tragic like plot turns. I won't call it a twist because it's not really a twist. Makima being a villain is not really a twist. They did something really smart with Makima's like sort of twist villain reveal where we all know the tropes with twist villains where it's like there's a character who's inconspicuously set up in the story, and then like in the third act it's like, oh ho ho, I'm a villain. Oh Anna, if only someone could love you.
I was waiting for it.
But Makima is they do a really good job of it because they do the same thing they did with Omni-Man in Invincible, where it's like it's sort of established from the very beginning that Makima is a villain, and Denji is just the only one who doesn't really know about it. So I'm not going to talk about the actual like literal ending. What I specifically talk about is how Chainsaw Man does themes good in chapters 39 and 93. I'm pretty sure the flipped numbers were intentional because they it's like the themes are tying back. In chapter 39, after a big battle with a guy whose literal name is Katana Devil, Denji goes on a date with Makima where they watch, like, they go on a movie marathon, basically. They spend all day going from movie theater to movie theater, they go and they watch 10 movies in one day, and all of them are garbage. And after each movie, they're remarking on how, like, oh, that movie was really generic. That was a stupid movie. That was awful. And then, like, there's bits where they're in the theater, people are having really emotional reactions, and neither Denji or Makima are, like, connecting to the movie at all. They're just watching it very stoically. That movie was stupid. It was contrived. I'm not a fan of tearjerkers. And then they watch one movie. They watch their final movie, and the movie has them both bawling in the theater. And, like, they both really connect to it. And after they come out of the movie, they're both like, that movie I'm gonna remember it. So Denji says, that last movie I'm gonna remember it until the day I die. And Makima goes, that one movie was worth the cost of all today's tickets. And that's like a little cute moment. It seems. And then all the shit happens between chapter 39 and 93. And when I say all the shit, I mean a lot of shit happens between these chapters. But essentially, Denji has lost everything. Everything has going fuck up. Makima is now the villain. Makima is trying to basically erase the planet. Everything is going wrong. Denji is now the only person who can confront Makima. Denji confronts Makima. Makima tries to convince him of, like, joining her to create, quote unquote, a perfect world where, because, like, there's some devil nonsense with, like, the Chainsaw Man's power, and, like, she wants to use the Chainsaw Man power to create a perfect world, and she wants Denji to join her to do this. And instead of having, like, a super, like, Denji's not an intellectual character. This is an important thing to know at this point. So Denji's not going to, like, he's not going to just beat her, and he's not going to just, like, confront her on an ideological, like, intellectual level. But he goes up to her and he's like, Makima, in this perfect world you want to make, will there be any bad movies? And she goes, no, in a perfect world, but there would be no bad movies. And he goes, well, I guess I gotta fucking kill you. And it's a very simple way of tying together this whole idea that the story is building up to like the value, I guess, of, like, negative experiences. And, like, it's just so fucking good. It's so, like, it's subtle, but it's simple, and it's like it ties that shit together. And then there's a big crazy fight after that whole interaction, where it's like, I think when the anime comes out, it's going to go down as, like, one of the craziest fight scenes ever, because they're basically these two immortal demon people who can, like, instantly regenerate, fighting each other with powers that can, like, instantly dismember their opponents. So they're just, like, dismembering each other and instantly regenerating. Like, there's this one panel where, like, he cuts her head off, and then, like, the head, like, plops back on. It's really wacky. I'm going off track for, like, the actual ending, but yeah, Chainsaw Man has, like, thematically one of the better endings that I've ever seen. Enough. I have other case studies. I feel like I harped a bit too much on Chainsaw Man, but I have other case studies. I have also Disco Elysium, which I won't get into because I have screamed at just about everyone in this chat to play it. But essentially, Disco Elysium, it has a really great ending. It does the thing that I like, where it's bittersweet, and it's like, it does the thing again where it does the thing where it's like, the story ends in a way that's, like, super satisfying thematically, and, like, the way that it presents itself, it might seem, like, unsatisfying on, like, a literal level, but then as you go through it, it's like, oh yeah, this is shit. And then Evangelion, which has one of the most one of the wildest endings I've ever seen. If you've never seen any of Evangelion, Evangelion is a 25 episode mecha series that slowly gets psychologically horrific and cosmically fucked up and has more and more body horror. Right up until the end of Evangelion, which is a theatrically released 90-minute psychological ordeal. And it's wonderful. I love it. And I have two bad case studies. One of them is Ready Player One, which I hate all of Ready Player One. I Ready Player One makes me want to vom. But the very ending of Ready Player One is also really, really stupid. How they're like, oh, and now we make the video game. But you can't play it on Tuesdays and Thursdays because you gotta go out and see the real world. It's really fucking stupid.
This is basically like you can't work on Sunday because it's God's day.
Literally, it's exactly that. Because like if they wanted to, because the thing is they've established in Ready Player One. They've established in Ready Player One throughout the whole story that like the video game world is like basically a stand-in for the real world. Most people do their jobs here. They make their livelihood through here, and most people like they just have there's a scene where a guy dies in the game and loses all of his money and he tries to fucking kill himself because the money in the game, that's like the real actual currency of the world. He's basically just lost his entire life savings. Which is also just a weird world building thing. like fuck. You would think like that, like if it had gotten to that point, that would have been changed very quickly. But no, but whatever. Ready Player One's world building is bad. I'm not here to harp on that. I'm here to harp on its ending. How stupid it is.
Of all the things you've told me about Ready Player One, Gabe, and of all the things that you've been sharing with us about Ready Player One, and by extension Ready Player Two, you have never fucking shared the ending, and that's fucking hilarious.
It's so funny. It's so weird that they're like that. He's just like, oh, well, you people got to get out and see the real world and so it's not playable on Tuesdays and Thursdays.
The more I learn about Ready Player One, the more I'm like, how did this get like so popular?
It's references. People love references. The second ending I want to talk about is a movie called Downsizing with Matt Damon.
Oh God.
Oh God.
Have you both seen this movie?
I've seen the trailer, thought it was stupid, and didn't think about it for another second afterwards until just now.
Brooke, have you seen it?
Yeah, I've seen it.
Okay, so you know what I'm about to talk about.
Oh no.
So Downsizing, for those listening or on the podcast who don't know what Downsizing is about, Downsizing is a movie with Matt Damon where there's a new science breakthrough where we can take people and we can make them real little. We can make them real tiny.
Kids.
What?
Honey, I Shrunk the Kids.
Exactly. There's a scientific breakthrough called downsizing where it's like the scientists are like, hey, you know how we solve global warming? Well, we're just gonna take people and we're gonna make them real little.
To solve global warming?
Yes, they have a less of a carbon footprint or something. I don't know.
What? Wait, okay, that's new. I didn't know that was what the fucking movie was about.
Yeah, so the scientists are like, well, solve carbon footprint, so we're going to make people real little, and we're going to send them to a little city where they can be real little and have a real little house. And they can, and like because the fact that it costs less to make their life savings are like $1 billion in Little People World, so you can get a mansion for like $10,000 there. And then Matt Damon goes there, and like some shit happens. And he gets divorced, and then he's like in an apartment because he lost all of his money or something in the divorce. And then he meets a Spanish maid, and he falls in love with her, and they go into Sweden, and like they learn about a group of people who are going to hide into a bunker to escape global warming, and like there's a whole deliberation of whether or not Matt Damon should go into the bunker to get away from global warming because the rest of them don't want to go into the bunker, and they don't, and he'd be separated from his wife. And it's like I'm watching this and I'm like, what happened to the fucking little people? What does this have to do with shit about it? I'm just watching a bunch of little people in fucking Sweden talk about. There is a point where if you try to take when you come up with a wacky premise, you need to have an ending in mind that has the premise in mind, because otherwise sometimes you'll have a situation like Downsizing, where you have Matt Damon in Switzerland. I can't remember, Scandinavia.
Only one of those is in Scandinavia.
Europe.
There we go.
In Europe, with a bunch of European guys and his Spanish wife, and Christoph Waltz is there, and they're talking about going to a bunker, and Christoph Waltz is like, no, Matt Damon, don't do it. And his wife is like, no, don't do it. And Matt Damon's like, oh, but I want to do it. I want to get into the bunker and be safe from global warming. And like the whole time they're all little, they're all real tiny, but like you can't tell anymore because nothing about the movie is conveying that they're tiny. It just looks like regular sized people, and they're going into regular sized houses, and there's a regular sized bunker, but then the movie's like insisting on you, oh, don't you forget they're all real tiny. And I'm like, I can't fucking see it. I can't fucking why are they not tiny? I don't know why this movie makes me so irrationally angry. I haven't seen it since it released, and like it's a stupid little, like just kind of bad comedy. But like I remember I saw the trailer and I was like, oh, they baked them little. That sounds hilarious. And then I went to see it, and it's like that's like 30 minutes of the movie.
Okay, Gabe.
What was the point? I'm sorry.
Gabe, breathe.
Yeah, easy, dude.
I'm sorry.
Like, take care of yourself. This.
Hearing you try to power through sickness to get this rant off has been the highlight of my night.
It's very funny, but also I'm very concerned about you.
Holy shit!
Listen, I promise, I'm not like sick. I'm on like the last stretch of a cold where my throat is just scratchy.
Yeah, and I can tell.
And that's that's actually where you should be taking the most care, because if you don't, then your fucking your voice might be gone the next morning.
What the fuck are you talking? No.
Okay, so take a couple of breaths, have some water.
Yeah, some water. I'll be right back.
Okay.
I'll be right back after. Yeah, I'll stay here for a minute longer. Yeah, I'm good.
Okay. Well, any other topics are we gonna talk about Game of Thrones, or are we just gonna?
I mean, we could always go into like controversial endings.
Ooh, that's an interesting topic. Yeah. So, Game of Thrones. I've never fucking watched anything but the first season, but I've read all the books, and I think it suffers from the exact same thing Patrick Rothfuss does: expectation.
Yeah. That is fair.
And like, we've kind of covered the topics that revolve around Game of Thrones. The idea that people tried to predict the ending, the writers got mad, pulled the rug out, and ended up creating something unsatisfying. Let's not forget that they were paying the actors like $1 million an episode or fucking more. So it was driving the fucking studio bankrupt, and they had to end it as quickly as possible. Like, so many problems.
Yeah. Yeah, I think a lot of people also theorize that, I think rightly so, that the writers were just done with it. And they didn't care about the ending. And so I think it was a rush to end it as quickly as possible so that, they could move on to what they thought were going to be bigger and better things. We all know how that worked out for them. But I think kind of to conclude the episode, like when you're writing an ending, it has to matter. Like you have to care about how your story's going to end it well. You can't just like throw something out and hope it sticks. You have to like Gabe was just talking about, all these thematic connections in the stories he likes. And I think that's definitely a really important aspect to it is, finding a way for things to come not necessarily full circle, but things have to it has to it has to like fit. It has to matter, you know. And whether that's like thematically, well, I mean, it probably should match thematically. That's how you do good writing in general. But like, you know, just finding those pieces, finding the way to connect the ending to the heart of the story and where it came from.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Like even for movies and franchises that, you know, that end on a cliffhanger or are setting up or are meant to set up like a featured series, like the ones that do it well still feel like conclusive enough. Like they still have some way of, you know, tying up the loose ends in the current story while still expanding on, like, you know, a larger overall narrative. Like, you know, for all the flack that, you know, like the MCU is trying nowadays by continuing their narrative, like there's a reason why it worked for so long, because it was fresh. It like felt like there was like somewhere leading, like they were all leading to something. And ultimately by Endgame, Marvel's longest running story at that point, like, you know, for all the way from 2008 to 2019, like the story was over and people were satisfied. And when you talk about like smaller trilogies too, or like smaller franchises too, like, you know, Shadow and Bone, The Matrix, like those clearly knew what their story and end goal was. They knew how they were going to end the story and how all of that mattered to all of the character building and, you know, like setup and relationships that they were building over the course of the franchise. There was an end goal that mattered. And when you have that, like when it feels like it was thought about for more than 5 minutes, even 5 seconds, and it's special and it's unique and delivers something really not completely conclusive, but like enough to you know, leave you wanting more, then that's a good story. That's how you end it. Like that's how you, like, you know, as the cliche goes, it's a nice cherry on top of the cake.
Yeah,
Who puts cherries on cake?
A lot of people actually. But I do want to say one other thing I think that we haven't really mentioned that's important is, well, I mentioned earlier, I think sometimes endings are hard because you don't want to let go of the world or you don't want to let go of the characters. But a good story, a good ending will invite you back in. It's something you can put down once you're done and go back and pick it up and reread it, you know?
Yeah.
A good ending will make you want to revisit a story over and over again as many times as you want. I mean, like, how many of us have like reread or rewatched something multiple times? Probably all of us. Something that we had some form of enjoyment out of. You know, like no one's gonna go back and revisit Game of Thrones after that ending. But when there's something ends satisfyingly, it invites you to go back and experience it all again.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I agree. I've done many rereads in my time of things that were worth it, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And if we're doing closing comments, I have a singular closing comment, and I'm not going to make it long. It's been something I've talked about many times. If we're going to do a television or movie adaptation, can we wait till the books are done being written first?
Please.
So we actually know what's going on, and then you don't put fucking staggering amounts of pressure on the poor author. Like, God, you're ruining the act. Like, Game of Thrones is pretty much dead and ruined because of their pressure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd like to extend that to the world of video games too. Please have a story that you're wanting to tell and make sure that it's thorough and conclusive. If you're going to set up sequels, that doesn't matter. Seriously, just know the story that you're trying to tell, and like whether or not it lands or not, just own up to it. Because like divisive endings, especially in media, can be actually very fun to talk about. Like, it's always fun, like, either, like praising or ripping into like a story, because like, especially when it's with its ending, because it's those final moments that imprints a very important signature, like with what Alex was saying. Like, even if it's completely new characters, but the same world, or maybe like the same characters exploring, different parts of the country, like you have like magic in your characters or in your world building. Like, you don't always have to continue. You just have to think. There's nothing wrong with ending, because through fan investment and through like proper care and attention, your legacy as a writer will continue to live on, even if all the favorite characters that you have spent time and energy like creating, they could long have since retired from glory, or have passed down, or have been dishonorably shunned, or dead, whatever. As long as there is something, like, as long as you don't lose what made that story special by the end of it, as long as you don't lose that, then people will always come back to you.
Yeah, I mean, literally look how many stories we still talk about, still read, still whatever, like centuries after they've been written. A good story will stick with you and will stick with other people, like, through time.
Mm-hmm. Like, it's what makes like Romeo and Juliet among a lot of Shakespeare works still very iconic. It's what makes Star Wars such a bankable franchise still. It's what makes like big world heavy like settings so fun to play around in, where you get spin-offs like The Mandalorian and the Book of Boba Fett and Star Wars, but and Clone Wars but at the same time, like that, like, to kind of not spend too much time talking about it because I've already said it, but just whether it's Star Wars or whether it's Shadow and Bone, like each of them kind of understands what they are, and the writer the creator essentially understands how to end one chapter. Like, if you want to prolong a series' investment, like ending a character story does not mean the end of the franchise. It doesn't mean the end of Star Wars, or it doesn't mean the end of Shadow and Bone. It just gives you the opportunity to expand more without forcing it.
And then again, even if it does end, even if the story ends and you don't continue it and with the same character or with a different character, if you wrote it well, if it ended well, it's gonna live on in the minds of people. There's probably some wild fan fiction out there about it, like almost 100% guaranteed. So yeah, I think I don't know what I was gonna say after that. Don't be afraid to end things, because nothing's ever really over.
So, does that mean, are we done?
I will do the sign off, sure. Thanks everybody for listening in. We are at the InkGuild on TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter, but our main home is on YouTube and Spotify. But you can also connect with us individually through our own social media. Check out our Wix if you want to learn more about us, and keep an eye out for more podcasts and other creative projects. So thanks again for listening, everybody, and have a good night.
Night, everybody.
Good night.
The end.